Alrighty. Now, it's customary in any stream that the first few seconds just be an awkward thing as everyone realizes that things are live.
Ah.
But things are live right now.
Ah. Okay.
So I'm just setting up my things so I can see the chat while we talk.
All right.
And so here we are. It is May, and as per my ongoing dedication to my growing number of subscribers, this day is, of course, Subscriber Appreciation Day. And it's normally in the last Sunday of the month, but this next week I'm going to be in somewhere very far away from here. And so I'll be somewhere in the Yucatan Peninsula doing something.
Oh, nice.
Or actually, next Sunday I will be traveling to that place or leaving to travel to that place. But so I couldn't do it. And I have for a long time wanted to do something with good old Matt Mitrovich down, if you can see him.
Hi, everybody.
He is, as far as, so let me just try to see if I can get this out right. So you're a YouTuber, but that's kind of like the end result of something else. You're a blogger / book reviewer with a specific focus on alternate history fiction.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of everything. I kind of started off putting myself on the internet by being a blogger. I had a blog called Alternate History Weekly Update, which I had a lot of fun doing. I did it for about 5 years before I finally shut it down because I wanted to get more into YouTube. And so I created my channel, The Alternate Historian, which kind of focuses on the same sort of topics, alternate history. Along with that, I'm also a judge for the Sidewise Awards for Alternate History. So every year we pick the best alternate history novel and short story and give it an award. I've done that for about a year now, so I'm going on my second award period, which I think we're going to be announcing the nominees and nominees soon for the 2016 Sidewise Awards. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and this is a growing piece of it's a growing genre. Like, it was something that was a little obscure not 5 years ago, but now with just trying to think of like all of the alternate history things that have hit 11/22/63 and oh gosh, I'm brain farting on the Amazon.
Man the High Castle.
Man the High Castle, and just general growth in the field.
Yeah, alternate history is probably the obscurest genre that nevertheless has existed since the BC. It has these moments where it becomes insanely popular. Around the 90s was a good time because you had shows. I think that was around the time like they made the Fatherland, I think, on HBO. I want to say it was in the 90s. And I think didn't like Sliders come out in the 90s too, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Yes, with John Rhys Davies. It was a fun show.
Yeah, for a while. It really jumped the shark in the last couple seasons, but I still enjoy it occasionally. So.
Didn't John Rhys Davies get eaten by a T-Rex or something in that show?
Oh, it's been so long since I've seen that kind of show, but I don't remember. I can't say with any kind of certainty. But yeah, it has become more popular as of late. Especially because of a lot more mainstream shows that have been dealing with it. Another good example is Timeless, which just got renewed after getting canceled. So they occasionally deal with alternate history, although more on a smaller scale than you would see like Man the High Castle or 11/22/63 or any kind of other things that have come out since then. It's a fun genre. I've loved it ever since I first read a Harry Turtledove book called World War and the Balance, which is about, and yeah, this isn't going to sound plausible at all, but here we go. It was about an alien race invading the Earth in the middle of World War II. So you have all humanity geared up to fight total war, and suddenly aliens. And it was a very interesting story, seeing how humanity dealt with this and how you had these various different ideologies, democratic capitalists, fascism, communists, Japanese imperialists, all sort of having to put aside their differences because there's an even greater foe, and how that's easier said than done in many cases. And it was a fascinating series, and it was the gateway into getting me into alternate history in general.
Yeah, I think that book wins the record for. We had a conversation on Twitter about this like a few months ago. It is it has to win the record for the novel that I have tried to read the most amount of times. And I guess like this is like a Harry Turtledove thing, is that he's really into big ensemble casts.
Yeah.
And so the first like 100 pages is like setting up like 10 different characters.
Yeah, he loves having big casts. It's very like George R. R. Martin's got a very similar style of writing as well. He has a lot of characters, a lot of different point of views. So if you read any sort of like a Song of Ice and Fire, you kind of get what Harry Turtledove's trying to do. And kind of like Martin as well, he loves to kill off characters. You might have a character you've been following for several books and you love, and then he's dead. Man, here's a new perspective to see from. And Harry Turtledove will pull from pretty much everybody. He'll have American characters, German characters, Canadians, Russians, Japanese, Chinese, Australians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He loves pulling from as many perspectives as possible. And I love the author, I really do. But if I had one like major criticism, is that sometimes he likes to give like certain of his characters like this one thing that he'll always make sure he mentions every time it's their point of view. Like probably the worst example was this one character in the Timeline 191 books, which was about the South winning the Civil War, and it would pretty much showed history from like a generation after the Civil War had been fought all the way to the end of that universe's World War II. And there was this one character who every time he was on there had to talk about how badly he got sunburned. And that was like a constant. You always would have to hear, man, I really get sunburned really easily. Man, I really get sunburned really easily. And literally the last page in the last book that this character is ever in, we find out he has skin cancer. And I'm like, what the hell? Why? It's just like, it's ridiculous. But you know what? I should be defending a guy who I really like, but it's just, that's something that's always kind of stuck out at me. I can understand why some people might have trouble getting into it, because a lot of his books kind of like, he constantly reintroduces his characters all the time, even within the book. And that can be kind of like head scratching for people who aren't used to it, that kind of like storytelling. But some of his stories do have from like one individual or just a couple, like Ruled Britannia, which is about the Spanish Armada successful in invading England. There's only a couple of perspectives in that story, and one of them is William Shakespeare, who's being asked both by the British resistance and the Spanish occupiers to write plays to celebrate the change in the Spanish occupation, or to rally the people into overthrowing said Spanish occupation. And it's actually a fascinating book. And I often will tell people to read that book first before they try reading like In the Balance or the Timeline 191 books, because you really got to like Turtledove's writings, I think, to get in some of those longer series, because they require a commitment.
Someone who just popped in wanted to note the author's name. It's Harry Turtledove.
Yeah. And that is his name. It sounds made up, but that is his name.
I remember I first heard about him because I was like, it was back when I lived in Quebec, and we had like just spent a day out in the woods shooting at like an old 100-year-old sugar shack, which is like a place you used to make maple syrup. Oh. And we were just, my friend who lived in the country had just gotten this black powder rifle that he was just dying to try out, which black powder rifle, like it was a actual muzzle loaded rifle that we were firing. And I have a short video on Facebook somewhere of me firing this thing. And it fires like you would think a muzzle loaded rifle with like a firing cap and everything, where like it sparks, you get powder burns all over your hand that has on the trigger, and then it explodes and tons of smoke comes out. And it was fun. But then we went swimming, and then we had like a campfire and cooked some steaks. It was like a whole night. And then we got like into like, the night, when you're like out late at night with the guys, and all of a sudden you start talking about the big questions in philosophy, and all of a sudden someone was like, there's this book about like lizards that invade during World War II. And we're like, oh. It's like David Icke's dreams come true.
Yeah, and that's always what I sort of like. That book symbolized like one of the things I like about alternate history, that it has these like very high concept ideas. Another good example is S.M. Sterling's series Dies to Fire. The Emberverse. It's called Emberverse, but it starts with Dies to Fire. I should clarify. And that's that whole series begins when modern technology like electricity, even gunpowder, just stops working, and the fallout that comes from that, which means billions die when modern technology stops working. But at the same time, people survive in those kind of societies they build on, and they borrow. The people who are building societies borrow a lot from the past. You have one guy who is a member of the Society of Creative Anachronisms, decides to create this medieval society with him as the Lord Protector, as it's called. You have this one woman who's a Wiccan priestess who creates a sort of like idealized version of like Irish pagan society. And then you have another guy who ends up, creating this sort of like he crashes, I think, like in Idaho, and as he tries to head west to Oregon, he's building this sort of like following of horse soldiers, almost like they're the Mongols, and it's really fascinating stuff. And all this happens pretty much in Oregon, so that's already a weird state to begin with. So it just makes it just a tad weirder. It's a really fascinating series, although people don't always consider it alternate history. I still do, since the changes happened in 1998, and the book was published years later. So it's borderline alternate history, but it still has that high concept ideas that I really enjoy.
Now, one of the many reasons why I wanted to have you on, I've been wanting to work with you for a while because our interests overlap rather well.
That's true.
But a few months ago, 2 months ago, when I had the cynical historian Cypher on the stream, he is like another professional historian, so we had like a real geek out session, and the topic of alternate history came up because somebody in the chat was asking about it, and he actually was rather against it. We had this conversation. He was like, maybe it works as like a genre of fiction, but what he really didn't like was, as I'm sure like the undercurrent communities of people who just write scenarios. And he's kind of thinking like, oh, like these are not like, what's the point? And like, what is like the, like, what, like there's very, the value added thing as a historian, I guess.
Well, here's the thing. I don't particularly disagree with him all that much. One of the things you got to remember is alternate history has its sort of roots in science fiction. Some of its earliest creators were in the science fiction genre, at least the modern sense of what alternate history is. And, even today, when you try to find a book of alternate history, you're going to find it in the science fiction section at your local bookstore or library. So it is in that sort of branch. And so a lot of these stories are just that. They're stories. They're meant to entertain first and foremost, and that's fine. We all need a little entertainment, but that doesn't mean I don't think that in certain respects alternate history isn't a legitimate way to understand history. Something I've always noticed being part of the alternate history community is that alternate historians, the really good ones, know history, and you kind of have to, because if you really want to like understand the genre, if you really want to understand these stories and why some of the twists and turns they take when history changes is sort of important, you need to understand history yourself. So it's almost like it's a genre of just very historically literate people coming together and asking the question, what would happen if we changed this? And you kind of already see that in history. You sort of already see that sort of implied what if in a lot of historical works. Traditional history, I'm saying. Like if a historian would be like, X happened because of Y. Well, an alternate historian would be like, so wait a second, if X didn't happen, would that mean Y wouldn't happen? And I think looking at it from that perspective can give you an idea of finding sort of like these moments were very important. They're not to be dismissed. But that's a very simplistic way of showing how alternate history can help you understand it. Because one alternate historian might answer that question, well, no, of course not, because of Z. These are kind of historians who might make the argument like, humans' choice, human decision-making really doesn't have that big of an impact. You're going to see, this is like a very Marxist way of looking at history, where it's the, intangible forces like, social structures, the economy, etc., have the really big impact of history, and we're essentially just riding the waves of it. And yeah, maybe occasionally humans might be able to steer the ship in a certain direction. The current's taking it to a place, and there's really little you can do to stop it. Other alternate historians be like, no, of course, because of like things like the butterfly effect, like even tiny insignificant changes can still sort of like have a cascading effect and cause vast differences down the road. You sort of get into the sort of idea of the great man theory, which, yeah, I don't like the great man theory either. And the great man theory kind of says like there's certain people who just because of their force of personality are able to change the course of history, the Napoleons and the Genghis Khans and the whatevers. And that sort of is kind of silly, because it's sort of like, sometimes some people, even the really people who could read about in history books, are in many ways a product of their times. And even if they were to be drowned at birth, that doesn't mean someone else waiting in the wings wouldn't get a chance to do the same thing, especially if everything was right for them to show up. In that kind of sense, a lot of alternate historians who still believe that human decision making has an impact, it means that every human, regardless of how powerful they are or how insignificant they are, could have an impact on history if something happened to them. Like I might one day decide to take the long way while walking to work, and I get hit by a car. Because I get hit by a car, I don't happen to keep living on, have a kid who has a kid who has a kid who then does something really important, possibly. So it's and in that case, those kids don't have their own kids who go on and have their kids. And so humans who wouldn't have existed don't exist. And that could cause changes down the way if you don't have those people interacting. Sort of like, let's say World War I never happened. Think of all the people who would live and have kids, who would then have kids, and all the people who wouldn't live because so-and-so's wife would have married somebody else. And so someone else wouldn't be there. The entire human, at least, and some people might argue, oh, it's just the actors would change, but the events would still be happening. Possibly, but you just don't know. Who would have thought having that millions more people still alive at that point might impact demographics of the world? Who knows what the world would really look like? And it's that is a fascinating thing to speculate about, but it's also hard to get right. Very kind of like, it's hard to, I'm rambling here, so feel free to interrupt me, because I could go on and on and on. It's hard. That's where it comes, where it's like people might, kind of raise their eyebrows, being like, how can you know it's going to happen? It'll happen like this. Is like, we don't. It's sort of just like it's an educated guess. It's based on our own research, our own knowledge, our own thoughts of what this person may or may not do, or what these people may do, or someone just in that position might or might do. And yeah, occasionally we take a little creative liberty in it. But that happens all the time, because alternate history, again, is more of a literary genre. It's about making stories. Now, if you want to get to more of the scholarly side, you're talking about counterfactual history. And in that case, counterfactual historians tend to be a little less prone to flights of fancy. They might focus more on short-term to medium-term changes to history and won't write centuries worth of false history, because they know they can't happen. And they often will avoid mentioning certain people because they probably won't exist, and they'll talk more in vague generalities. And it's just sort of a way to understand sometimes what's at stake. Like, what would the world be like if the South won the Civil War? Well, I could probably tell you one thing off the bat. African Americans probably wouldn't have it that much better in the South. They probably would have it a lot worse if that happened. That's one thing I think anyone can agree upon. No, there's very few people are going to say that, no, things would be even better for them if that happened. Like, really? What the hell are you smoking? So it's I'm rambling, so I'm going to let you.
There's a huge list of things that I could respond to on that. So just to answer everyone, Ian Lees just asked who you were, but then he just read your name on the thing. But like, to kind of reintroduce you for the viewers, he's I would probably just say an expert on alternate history who has his own alternate history YouTube channel, and he is a judge for a alternate history like short fiction anthology book, like journal, I guess it would be called.
I would hate to call myself an expert because I'm wrong more often than not when it comes to things. If you ever read the comments section of any of my videos, yeah, I'm definitely not an expert.
Okay. Well, there's a few things that you do, and I definitely want to showcase a few of them. Like, you were discussing how the best alternate historians are the ones who study history and such. And then I remembered that you do a series on like tropes and kind of recurring things within. And the 2 episodes that stick out on that angle show how bad it is when you don't know history and how good it is when you do, or how often something's happened. The one is that how everyone keeps repurposing the biography of Pedro the First.
Yeah.
So for those guys in the audience who don't know the story, Pedro I was the first emperor of Brazil, and he got Brazil's independence. But he was the child of the King of Portugal, who was exiled to Brazil during the Napoleonic years and basically declared his independence. And then the Brazilian king was kind of like, or sorry, the Portuguese king was basically like, all right, I guess. And then Brazil was independent from then on, and it had an emperor whose name was Pedro. But then there's like, you made a video about how other historian or other alternate historians keep taking that story and throwing it with like the British monarch or something like that.
Yeah, they love to do it with the British monarchy. They love the idea of the king or queen of England ruling more often than not from North America. They and where Washington would be, they probably would call it Columbia in that sense. But yeah, they love having the British monarch be somewhere else, kicked out of the country and ruling from somewhere else. It's fascinating, and it's amazing how it crosses so many different genres. Like even anime has played with that idea. And I think I talked about that in the video as well. But I think because it actually happened, that it makes it a little bit more realistic for it to happen again, rather than something like completely ridiculous, like to talk about that sort of different series I do. I also talked about like space filling empires, like how you see a lot of
that was the other one I was going to talk about. Yeah, how it shows the lack of knowledge, especially lazy alternate historians who don't want to do history of. Let's be honest, it's mostly non-white places in the world.
Yeah, everything is just the same. There's no reason to learn anything about the world. It's just lines drawn on the map, so I can erase the lines and boom, empire.
Yeah, like how many alternate history maps have you seen that have these giant blobby countries in most of the world, but then has like a highly detailed map of Europe?
A fair few. Although I can't be too hard on them because you kind of, if you look at like the map of Europe, the map of the world in 1914, it sort of looks like that. You got a highly detailed map of Europe, and then large, just massive empires everywhere connected to the little highly detailed map of Europe. But that caused problems in our own world when people didn't consider that there may be differences to their colonies, and that has still had ramifications down the road. And so the thing is, though, a lot of alternate historians, especially the good ones, are getting away from that kind of stuff. They don't make just giant space-filling empires, but you still see it in more of the mainstream works of alternate history, the stuff you're going to find in your bookstores and stuff like that. But in stuff where the communities online, where you see people get together, you start seeing more detailed attempts and more realistic attempts to portray countries and empires and et cetera, et cetera. I say this pretty much on all my videos at some point or another. Research is important. You want to make a really good alternate history, you got to do your research. The problem is you're probably not going to ever find a big audience for it, which is one of the things that I feel like stops alternate history from ever feeling a lot of big mainstream success. The larger audience you want, you're going to kind of have to dumb the history down a little bit more. I'm making hand motions, but I'm realizing it's not coming on the screen. It's kind of why like shows like The Man in the High Castle, I think, work, because people think they know a lot about World War II, or at least they're familiar with it enough that they get some of the names and places, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with 11/22/63. Everyone knows about Kennedy being shot, and they probably all imagine what would have happened if he didn't. But when you're talking about, I don't know, what would have happened if some what would have happened if the Mamluks never fell and they continued to rule Egypt? Most people would be like, Mamluks, Egypt, what? I don't care about that. There's no white people there.
Yeah, you hit on a lot. So the space filling empire thing. I also remembered that you made a reference to Europa Universalis 4 or Europa Universalis series, and I do love it because actually I think what the systems in that game show is the issue, and that is that if you ever do a world conquest in that game, you basically have to do it by doing hardcore cultural indoctrination on people and genocide. And even then, when you conquer the world, basically you are conquering the world despite the fact that like multiple parts of it are rising up and fighting against you at any given time. Yeah. It's like the most unstable thing ever. It's quite a thing.
Yeah. And you suddenly turn your core populace into a minority in their own country. And and the game, at least the earlier versions of the games they were a lot easier to do that. I haven't played some of the more recent versions, like, the Universal 4 and stuff like that. But I played like 1 and 2, and then I played Hearts of Iron a lot. And that was a very easy game to create a space-filling empire.
Yeah.
I remember. Oh, go ahead.
There's one thing about the game that I think that you'll find really cool, and it overlaps with both of like kind of the stuff that we do. And so they recently released an expansion, actually not that recently anymore, where they changed the technology system. And the way that it worked in the past is it basically had increasing impediments on your technology based on more or less what country you were in. The Western countries had the fastest, and then I think the slowest were like the Native Americans, who had like something like 12 times slower than the Europeans. And the only way to get to that speed was to Westernize, which would highly destabilize your country for about a decade, and you'd have to work it through. But then they changed it, and they changed it so that this is actually, I was planning on making a Guns, Germs, and Steel mod for it at one point. Which would have had it so that it was more about key inventions and things showing up in different places at different times, and they kind of spread from there. And they added it, and all of a sudden you had like waves and waves of angry people saying like, oh, it's so unrealistic now because like Native American tribes can survive the Columbian Exchange, and you can't just like walk in and overthrow them, because once you get in contact with the Europeans, the Native Americans get all the technology. And it's just like, it's kind of interesting, because what happens is that their engine is really bad at simulating disease. And so what they've done is they've made what I think is actually a pretty good understanding of what the Columbian Exchange minus diseases would be like. And that is that there would be some major Native American empires that would have adopted European technology rather fast and been pretty good at fending them off. And before long, you'd have a very different North America.
No, this has always been sort of an idea I've been kind of fascinated with. Like, what if you did get just rid of diseases somehow? Again, it's kind of implausible, because I don't know. I guess an alien space bat would have to come down and just fix it. But yeah, what if you had? Because I was watching one of your videos recently, actually, when you were talking about like, the Native Americans before Europeans arrived, and you were talking about numbers being in the hundreds of millions. And I'm like, well, yeah, they have the population that could significantly slow down European colonization. It would probably just keep them. It would keep the Europeans probably mostly hugging the coast for several centuries, probably around the time, if there's some sort of like age of imperialism, you probably see something would happen with Africa, where you then started to see large parts of it being, taken over, spheres of influence being cut up. But it would probably have, you would have these just tribes, existing, living, and forming countries, and being probably divided, across European colonial lines, and eventually gaining their independence. And it would have been it's a fascinating thing to play out. And I think in some ways it would parallel African history, at least in that sense.
Or Middle Eastern history.
Or that too, or pretty much any place where Europeans showed up.
Later on, yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's the whole disease factor. It really kind of prevented for that, large Native American states for showing up, especially in the areas north of the Rio Grande. speaking of that same company, Paradox, they also had they do that Crusader Kings, and I've always wanted to play the one expansion they did, where apparently you can have the Aztecs actually invade in game from the west, almost like the Mongols would do in the Eastern Europe. And I'm like, that would be awesome to watch.
Yeah,
that would be really cool.
I've played that game quite a bit, and I have done that. And what's amazing, the best parts they have is that they've written up a whole lot of flavor text and events and such. So when I played it and when that actually happened, I was playing as like an Indian like Maharaja or something. But you just hear like these like these like events, and it's just like about like they've like how the Europeans are freaking out because like they kidnapped like I think there was an event where like they had kidnapped the Pope, and then they had this whole event about where they took as a show of power, they built a giant like pyramid in Spain where they showed up, and they took the Pope to the top and like carved out his heart with an obsidian knife. And like all from that point onwards, you actually have like people starting to defect, like Catholicism starts to collapse because the idea of God's avatar on earth having his being sacrificed as a blood to the god of Huitzilopochtli or whatever, and it's just like, holy crap. It's the Sunset Invasion is the name of the
that's the name of it. It's been a while, I think, since I heard about it. So I don't play as many games as I used to in the past. Having a full-time job and now having a kid on the way is probably cutting into my free time very significantly.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But it's another example of like, because I've heard these games being referred to as alternate history generators. So
yeah, they kind of are, because as soon as you take control and can make your own decisions, you have the benefit of hindsight. And so it's like, there's another continent on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So, that's something I always remember doing when I was playing Europa Universalis, was like I would try to get, it's like try to make sure my country was ready to colonize, and I would get up the entire eastern seaboard of North America as quickly as possible, especially if I was like France or something like that. Or even sometimes like I played as Poland, because I always found that I just love the idea that the Poland Lithuanian Commonwealth being still existing and powerful, and knowing that it's like, okay, I got to make sure I knock out Russia really quick, and Germany and Austria. I got to make sure they're taken care of, because I know it's going to happen some years down the road.
My first game when I got Europa Universalis was I played as the Ottoman Empire. And I said, you know what, like, screw me getting like melted down in the Middle East over and over again. I'm going to get in the colonization game. And I, for no reason, just invaded Morocco and just said, Morocco, you're mine, because I wanted something on the west coast of Africa so that I could launch off. And all of a sudden you had it's just interesting to imagine there's people who would have existed like these large swaths of Native American territory, North America, like the Mississippi Valley area, being made up of Native American Muslims and speaking Turkish, and it's like, oh, that is very strange.
Yeah, there's a few stories I've read that have sort of kind of played on that idea. One is like Lion's Blood. I think it's by Stephen Barnes, I want to say, where I think the point of divergence is oh God, I can't remember the point of divergence. So, well, it doesn't matter. The point of divergence essentially means that Europe is kind of very primitive, while the Middle East and North Africa and Africa in general is very much more advanced. And it's African Muslims who discover and colonize the Americas, and they use white slaves that are sold by the Vikings to sort of work on their plantations in these new colonies. And so you have these like you have like this in North America where you have Vinland that exists and populated by Vikings, essentially where Canada is, and then you have this like Zulu colony, which are sort of like land grants given so the Zulus would act as a buffer between the Vikings and the more richer, profitable colonies to the south. You have like New Alexandria, which was colonized by a lot of Egyptians, and then you have a New Djibouti, which was colonized by a lot of Ethiopians. But it's like a lot of different African peoples have come to these colonies and are working there and dealing with stuff. And you have the Aztecs too, who still exist in this timeline, still kind of practice their own sort of religion, and they're often having a lot of like border clashes with the Africans. And it's a really, from a world building perspective, it's really interesting what they do. That I highly recommend if anyone gets a chance to read Lion's Blood.
That'd be great, because I think if there is one thing I could say about the genre as a whole is that it is very even the ones written by Americans are very Eurocentric.
Yeah, yeah. Although, especially again, it's especially a problem with the mainstream, but it's not. There are people out there who aren't so Eurocentric, and you're especially going to see a lot more of it in more of the online communities, especially like alternhistory.com and places like that, because you have people from various different parts of the world with various different outlooks and perspectives, and so they're able to write stories that most people wouldn't get a chance to read. I really wish I was doing this in my office, but now it's being turned into a nursery because I could show you all my books. I can pull some stuff out. But that is a problem, because especially in the English language alternate history, because again, you got a lot of Americans, you got a lot of Brits, Australians as well. So they kind of write from their perspective, and Canadians too. There's Canadian alternate history authors out there. So that's always a possibility, but there definitely are examples. I always thought Jordan Harbour, who does Twilight Histories, where it involves like in the universe, there's this you're kind of a time traveler. There's this organization called Twilight Histories that sends people on these kind of vacations into the past, except these vacations aren't often very fun and awful things happen. I remember he did one that I thought was really good, where they kind of travel into the future of an alternate history, where sort of the age of the ancient Egypt, the culture of ancient Egypt sort of never falls, and they've existed for so long to the point now that the earth is heading into an ice age, and the civilization has become so decadent and so like just collapsing in itself that people that they're tearing down old pyramids to build new pyramids, because that's how poor they are at this point. They don't have anything, and it's just, you're just watching a civilization that's so old collapse. And I definitely recommend checking that out if you just want some different perspectives, because I thought Jordan always does a pretty good job at doing that in some of his works.
All right. So there was the two things I wanted. So yeah, one for you to respond to the cynical story, and the other one was kind of to redo this conversation we had on Twitter. I kind of think it's like 6 months ago now or so, where I was trying to find an alternate history story to get myself to dive into. And because there had been a few things where like I had trouble reading In the Balance. And I mean, I'm still probably going to read it sometime. In grad school, you don't really get to do a lot of reading for pleasure anymore, but whatever. Then you have, I also, and now, okay, you might have to brace yourself for this. I didn't enjoy The Man in the High Castle, the novel.
No, that's fine.
I got about maybe halfway through before I was kind of done with it, because I think that Philip K. Dick just got way too into the scenario and forgot that stories are supposed to have characters and a plot and things are supposed to happen. And he just got way too much into just describing the setting. And I got a little bored.
No, I understand that. A lot of people have complained that it's not a very good story. I think I like it mostly because it's sort of, like you said, it doesn't do the usual story. I think that was kind of the point. The whole point of the story was just so to see these people live their lives. And they're not a protagonist per se in the traditional sense. They're not trying to get to a conclusion to save the world or stop the bad guy. The bad guy is won, and they're just trying to survive. And I think that was sort of what I liked about it the most. It was just watching these people just trying to survive in such a terrible world. And it's so terrible that even when they think about a world existing without the Nazis or the Imperial Japanese, they still think it's going to be pretty bad. And how they become so influenced by that they start sort of like even thinking like they're occupiers, despite the fact that they don't like them. I thought this is one story I thought was did a pretty good job of doing this, was another Harry Turtledove story called In the Presence of Mine Enemies. And it's a short story. It's a very old short story, so I'm not going to mind spoiling it, but I do still recommend checking it out. And if you're really interested in it, Turtledove even expanded into a full novel. Anyway, it starts off with this guy coming home from work. He's a bureaucrat in Berlin, in a world where the Germans have just curb stomp the entire earth. And he, you can tell that he's walking through this as calm as possible. He would be like just normal guy, except he's in, a uniform, and he's in freaking Nazi Germany, and it seems awful. But it's awful, but how like banal it is. He's just a guy coming home from work, and goes home to his family, and he's having a bunch of his friends and family over for dinner, and everyone's like Cat's like, oh, it's a family get together in one of the worst places in the world. And then they put some of the kids to bed except for one girl, and the girl's like, oh, this is great, I get to finally be up with the adults. And the dad's like, yeah, hold on a second, we got to tell you something. You're Jewish. We've been hiding in plain sight, essentially. And it's a kind of a powerful twist of being like, we've tried to survive as best as we could by just acting like good Germans, and it's worked, but we have to also at the same time preserve who we are. We're still Jewish. And so that's why we're telling you this. We're not going to just tell you you're German and just let you live. We're telling you got to keep this secret. And I remember reading it as a young kid and thinking of how powerful it was. And eventually he did a whole expanded novel where he sort of talked about, after that revelation was that girl, how she dealt with that. And meanwhile, kind of spanning more about what life would be like in this terrible society. And one of the things I liked about it too was, when they had those Adolf Eichmann trial, I can't remember who coined the phrase, but someone coined the phrase like banality of evil. When they saw Eichmann, he wasn't a monster with fangs and gore. He looked like just an old man. It's just like, this was a guy who led to the death of millions of people. How is that possible? And I feel like Turtledove really captured that whole banality of evil. That not all bad guys are comic book supervillains who, like Doctor Doom or something like that, who are scarred and, talk in like ridiculous prose and laugh maniacally.
Yeah.
Sometimes evil people are just someone who sits behind a desk and signs off on the deaths of thousands.
Yeah. I do have to say there's one thing that I can go for, and that is, I'll tell you that the best piece of alternate history that I've followed, there's two. One is a kind of an alternate history wiki scenario, and one was a movie.
Oh.
So just to I'm trying to find what I should be reading. So the alternate history I followed was the one that was on the site was a scenario in which, the whole 1984, 1983 Stanislav Petrov preventing nuclear war.
1983 Doomsday. Yeah.
So this one, the world had been destroyed, but the story went as far as 2010, where the handfuls of countries had survived and all sorts of stuff, and Australia had become this world superpower because it was the only country that was basically intact afterwards.
Yeah.
That is almost a trope in and of itself.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I actually contributed to that timeline for a while before I got into my blogging. For those who didn't know, 1982 Doomsday is this massive shared universe on the alternate history wiki, where people just have been building up ever since Stanislav Petrov wasn't on duty to prevent a nuclear war. Because in our history, there was this computer malfunction in a Soviet early warning system in 1983. Stanislav Petrov was in charge that day, and even though what he was supposed to do was to tell his superiors that America was shooting 3 missiles at them, he thought, nah, this doesn't seem right. Why would America just shoot 3 missiles on us if they're going to start nuclear war? They know that we would attack fully. So he decided not to. And because at the time, tensions were pretty high, during the war. You had Able Archer recently, the NATO exercises. You had that Korean plane that was shot down by the Soviets. And it seemed like nuclear war was imminent at the time. So, yeah, if maybe Petrov or somebody else had told the higher-ups what was happening, it's possible that paranoid Soviet officials would have been like, oh, shit, nuke everything. And that could have caused a nuclear war. And that's sort of what 1983 Doomsday does. And I've always found that to be kind of a plausible way of looking at nuclear war, because there was just so many checks and so many sort of ways to make sure this didn't happen. They almost, with the hotlines and all the treaties and everybody talking with each other, that it's almost like the only way it could have happened was this accident, that somebody freaked out and pressed the button before they had all the information. And in the world, it's like, I have to, I haven't done it in a while, but I love what people did with it, because, pretty much the Soviet Union isn't as bad off as the United States, because they're as a country, they're larger, and so they have places to hide things. And at the same time, because they were the ones who fired first, they have a moment to prepare. I liked how people showed that, because there was so much NATO and Warsaw Pact kind of like soldiers and personnel in Berlin, that you can make the argument that neither country would target it. So that would be one of the largest like European cities to still exist, and see what would come out of that. Again, yeah, Australia exists because it might have gotten a few nukes for being an American ally, but again, it's a very large country with a population spread out. It could be a place for essentially what was left of Western democracies to sort of like lick their wounds and, try to pull things together. And how South America, yeah, they might suffer at first with the collapse of the global economy, but being one of the few continents that wasn't hit at all, they would probably be in the best place to sort of become an economic powerhouse and be able to industrialize and just become this commercial center. And essentially something that 1983 Doomsday is always sort of stressed is that South America together is probably, especially Brazil, is probably more powerful than Australia, but Australia is trying to be that sort of like step into America's role as sort of the world police, while South America just wants to make money. They want, and it's a very interesting way of looking at it. And but they do have tropes too. They have the royal exile that we talked about with Pedro. One alternate story who worked on there found out that was it Prince Andrew? They found that he was actually on a ship in 1983, and so he probably, out of anyone in the royal family, would have survived. And they have him sort of forming this like exiled British monarchy in South Africa, using Anglo-Africans as sort of a power base, while South Africa is being torn apart, in racial conflict. And it was a fun timeline to do, very fascinating. Probably not the most plausible. It's definitely on the softer side. A lot of times people are trying to have fun. I think there's one nation that was created out of Lincoln, Nebraska, where a sort of cult is created that worships Lincoln as sort of this divine figure. And so it can get silly a few times, but it does take some fascinating twists and turns with nuclear war. And why don't you tell me the other story you wanted, the movie, and then I'll probably actually recommend some books for you and the viewers to actually check out.
All right, so this one I imagine is very famous, and so I'll do some more description for the people watching. So the movie is called Fatherland, and it is a alternate history movie where basically where it seems like one of the more realistic versions of the Nazis winning World War II, which is that they walk away with a French client state, a good chunk of Russia, and Germany is just a very powerful country, but it doesn't go and conquer half the planet. But because the Germans won the war, their propaganda was successful, and they were basically able to prevent knowledge of the Holocaust from getting out of the empire. And the movie centers around it takes place in the 60s, and it centers around a BBC journalist who's being sent to Berlin to celebrate Hitler's 80th birthday. And through some contacts, she actually finds out about the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And the whole movie is kind of this story about her just trying to escape from Germany and get back to London so that she can tell the world what happened. And it was a fun little spy movie almost.
Yeah, I don't think that's a very good movie.
Oh, really?
First off, to recommend a story, I definitely recommend reading the book by Robert Harris, Fatherland, which is based off of. That is really good. If you like spy, murder mystery kind of thrillers sort of molded into one, you'll definitely love Fatherland. It's really good. And I think it's because I read the book first that might have caused some issues. Like in the book, what caused the Germans to ultimately win was that the Enigma code was never cracked. That was recently the plot of what's the name of that movie with Benedict Cumberbatch?
Well, that's something really funny too, because what happens is depending upon the nationality of the author, different things win World War II. Was this written by a British person? Many American World War II victories have whoever gets a nuclear bomb first. But if I imagine a British person would imagine the Enigma code as the thing that saves World War II or something like that.
I just checked. The author, Robert Harris, is British. Well, he's English, but same thing. No, it's not. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Should I write one where where the Nazis won World War II because of inferiorly trained pilots or something, or because Svalbard wasn't taken back, or whatever other useless crap we got up to during World War II?
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to check to see what Canada did. For Americans, though, you would probably pick the D-Day invasion failing, which I think is what the film did, which I always thought was kind of silly to think that's what would cause the Germans to win. I mean, D-Day happened in 1944. The war was going to be ending the next year. This was the time when the Soviet Union was really pushing eastward. You had the Allies pretty much controlling half of Italy. This was not Germany at its best. The idea that somehow if D-Day failed, Germany would then just turn around and change the course of the Eastern Front was kind of silly at that point. They just didn't have the resources or the manpower. So no, I don't. If D-Day, in my opinion, if D-Day failed for whatever reason, yeah, it would be a huge blow to the Allied war effort. But it wouldn't stop the Soviet Union. They weren't going to just turn around and just like, oh, we give up. Sorry, Stalin.
Yeah,
they would keep fighting.
I still imagine the World War II scenario that I could see the Nazis winning in is basically based on my exclusive, in-depth experience playing Axis and Allies, which I think strategically sets it up fairly well. Which is, they had to break the Soviet spine before the U.S. got involved. That's like the way to do it.
No, I agree with you. I think I would also argue another way of doing it would be to get Britain out of the war early, not because of Operation Sea Lion happening. That wasn't going to happen either. The Germans just didn't have the capacity to launch an overseas invasion of Britain. They didn't have the Navy. They didn't have the landing craft. They never got air superiority. Not going to happen. But I've always thought Dunkirk, if the evacuation failed, that might be a big enough blow to British morale that they would agree. Once they got Churchill out of power, they would agree to a negotiated peace that would have left Britain alone, but have left Germany in control of Europe. And with Britain out of the war, there's very little places for the U.S. to launch any sort of to sort of like have a base to launch an invasion. And there probably wouldn't be that much interest to fight Germany, especially if Britain wasn't there, because it's one thing to say we have to help our friends Britain. It's another thing to say we have to just help our friends the Soviet Union. So if that could have happened, yeah, you might see Germany still manage to beat the Soviets in that point. I could still see the United States giving them materials, but it would give the Germans a much better chance in that case. But yeah, that's kind of one of the big reasons why I didn't like the film Fatherland, because they took something that I thought was very much more plausible with the Enigma code and replaced it with something that Americans would understand, which kind of comes back when I was saying before about how when you try to reach a more mainstream audience, your history tends to become a little more muddled, and you start doing things that the audience will understand. And a lot of Americans, I think this was put on HBO, so I can see why they would kind of go for American audience. A lot of Americans know what D-Day is, and so of course, if D-Day failed, Germans would win. But it's like that was near the end of the war. That doesn't seem like they would change things around that quickly. That said, Fatherland is a really good book. I highly recommend reading it. It has that just kind of political thriller. It has that thing like how the Germans would do everything they possibly could to cover up the Holocaust, and how people, being the era where people are kind of anti-Semitic, they probably wouldn't care all that much what would have happened to the Jews in the first place, so they wouldn't even look into it. And so if the Germans said, yeah, we just settled them out east, people would be like, all right, we trust you.
Yeah,
so
did the German chancellor deny the Jewish genocide? 100 years later, we'll still have debates about it. There'll be big ads in Times Square, and this is like a reference. I was in New York in 2015, and I guess I was in around the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide.
Yeah.
And both the Turkish government and like Armenian groups had purchased like tons of ads. So like what would normally be your regular Times Square experience was like half ads of like never forget the Armenian genocide and half ads of let's get over the Armenian genocide. And I was just like, this is a really strange time to come to New York City, I guess.
Yeah, it was. But that's what makes Harris's scenario so believable, because we're seeing it already. We're seeing with the Armenian genocide. We're seeing we see this evidence of people dying, and yet we see a country just doing everything they possibly can to say, no, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It's the worst kept secret ever, because we all know it happened, but no one wants to really do that much about it.
Yep. I think I found it. I found my Canadian World War II, like something that Canada did failing, causing World War II to be a loss.
Okay.
So Canada is, our World War II contributions are twofold. One was an epic failure anyway, which is we always try to pat ourselves in the back for something called the Dieppe raid, which was like a preparation for D-Day that failed, but we learned a lot of important lessons. That's what they always tell us, but whatever. The other one is that we were, I think something like at the end of World War II, we had the most advanced, or at least the biggest Air Force in the world, because Canada, with its unique position, was a good place to train fighter pilots and build airplanes and such. And so Canada doesn't do that, and then Britain loses the Battle of Britain, like the big air fight, which the British kind of used to rally themselves through the rest of the war. And that would have been right around the time where the Axis was either going to make it or break it. So there you go. That's why Canada's contribution or something. I don't know.
Oh, Canada contributed a lot. I mean, they were there at D-Day as well, storming the beaches. Although you mentioned that raid, and I remember reading that Churchill really pushed for that because he wanted it to be a failure, so that it would convince the Americans that an invasion of France was a bad idea, and they would stick to his kind of soft underbelly of Europe. Now, why anyone would trust Churchill to run a successful amphibious operation, especially after World War I have no idea. The Australians could have told you guys not to trust him. But
here's my plan. We're going to take a bunch of ships. There's a minefield in this water, so let's send lots of ships through it. Send the old ones first so that they blow up. And then we're going to land a bunch of Australians on the coast of Anatolia, where they're going to have no backup, and they're going to have the low ground, because I did not know that Anatolia has cliffs by its beaches, and so have the Turks completely destroy them. But don't worry, they're from the protectorates, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's Winston Churchill's wonderful naval strategy for breaking the Ottoman Empire during World War I.
Oh, Churchill. But no, I kid. He still did a lot of good too, as well. He was definitely the prime minister I think Britain needed to keep them in the war.
Did you watch The Crown?
I did watch The Crown. Lena and I watched it, and we loved it. We're looking forward to season 2. I don't know that much about the early monarchy. Not the early monarchy, because it's 20th century. Elizabethan age. Yeah, I mean, to say that with any certainty, I know this happened, I know this didn't happen kind of thing. But I still, as just sort of a drama, I still found it pretty fascinating and fun to watch. I thought Matt Smith did a really good job as oh God, why am I blanking on his name?
When The Crown came out, I was just like, this was the show, because I remember this wasn't the show.
Philip,
but like
Prince
I was like,
Philip,
yeah, Prince Philip. But like, I was like, I hope that this was worth leaving Doctor Who for, and it was. But then I remembered right after saying that Matt Smith didn't leave Doctor Who to do The Crown. He left it to make Terminator Genesis, and Terminator Genesis was terrible.
I saw the trailer for that, and I'm like, nope, not watching that. Even if it has Matt Smith in there. Oh man, one thing though I love, one thing I wish that any British drama would do, I really just want, it doesn't have to be like in your face about it. It could be just a split second, but I want there just always to be a scene where you see the TARDIS in the background. It just a split second there, boom, done. Because I just feel like that would be hilarious. And with Matt Smith, it would be great for him to walk by the TARDIS at one point.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's at a time where like those police boxes are a thing, so you can just have them walk by it.
Yeah, because season 2 is going to focus on the 60s, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, which means they're going to have to deal with the death of Churchill, and who is wonderfully played by John Lithgow. That's why I mentioned it, because John Lithgow was amazing in that show.
I didn't think he could do it. I thought John Lithgow, the guy from Third Rock from the Sun, I don't know, maybe, but he actually did a really good job. He was really good, I thought.
Yeah. But then again, he's another example of like, what is it with guys from sitcoms going into dramas where they then play psychopaths super, super well. And then you're like, oh, right, you're an actor. It happened with Bryan Cranston. It happened with John Lithgow.
Yeah. Bryan Cranston. We're getting away from alternate history here, but
we brought ourselves back. But John Lithgow was in Dexter, and he was like the scariest villain in the entire show.
Yeah. That I never actually saw Dexter, but I have watched Breaking Bad, and so I was again like, really, the dad from Malcolm in the Middle? But no, he was fascinating. He was a great actor, and it's just like, yeah, because he's an actor. He can do silly, he can do serious, he can do whatever. That's what makes a really good actor. But yeah, that was one of those like just roles where it's like, I can't believe I'm watching this guy, and yet it's fascinating. This is perfect for him.
Yeah, I especially liked one of my two favorite episodes of that show. I think one is the ones where they take really important historical events and they turn them into. And one was the London Fog, which I thought was an amazing episode that they did really well. And the second was the whole story of the lost Churchill portrait. That was amazing because like that really happened, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's a really good like dramatization because like this is like a story that people had speculated a lot about.
And I didn't actually know about that, and so when I saw that episode, I was like, is this real? And I was like, oh my god, it is. This wow. Now it's like, I wonder what it looks like. I mean, I know they put their interpretation, but it's like, oh, it would have been fascinating.
Yeah, there is a picture of the picture, but it's not very good. So yeah, for anybody watching in the audience, what happened is that I think it was for his 80th birthday, Winston Churchill had a famous British painter paint his portrait, and they spent a lot of time together, but the portrait didn't, like, he was expecting kind of a 19th century thing. Like, I imagine he meant his hand and his breast, like in the breast of his jacket and everything. But this was like a kind of more new avant-garde impressionistic painter, and he painted him in like this very like stark mix of like vulnerable and tragic, but also like this kind of thing about like a prime minister who's been through everything and is kind of just exhausted. And apparently Winston Churchill hated this picture, and they did not know what happened with it. And then like 20 years later, they like confirmed that it had been destroyed. Because he hated it so much. But apparently, for the people who did see it, it was like one of these like really great paintings that was just because he owned it and he destroyed it. Like a significant piece of art history was lost. And
it's one of those shames. It's up there, probably not up there with the Library of Alexandria burning to the ground, but still, it's one of those like moments where it's like you lose this. It's like, oh, if only we could hold on to it. I should do that if I ever get a time machine, go back in time and steal the painting from Churchill. We'll see if that happens.
That also that time machine thing reminds me of something too that I thought you'd find amusing, because alternate history and time travel are a fairly common thing.
Yeah, it is, especially a lot of the early alternate history, where another story I recommend you check out, or anyone listening, is Bring the Jubilee by Ward Moore. Well, it's set in a world where the South won the Civil War, but it involves time travel, because you have this guy who grows up in the North, which in this time is economically depressed, and he's poor, he can't get into school, but he loves history, and he eventually learns it through this very untraditional sort of like educational setting where all these kind of scholars kind of live in this sort of like utopian commune where they all work to maintain it by like working on a farm, but then they have time to themselves to work on their studies and stuff like that. And he ends up becoming somewhat of a famous Civil War historian, but he realizes that he'll never truly be able to know what's going on in the past unless he's there himself. And so someone working at this commune builds a time machine. It's like, this I didn't know what to do with it, but now I know what it is. It's for you to go and do that. So it's like, oh, this is going to be amazing. So he goes to the Battle of Gettysburg. Again, spoiler alert, but again, this is a story that's decades old, so whatever. He goes there and he ends up doing something, and it causes, because in the timeline he's from, the South won, but because he goes there, the South loses, and suddenly there isn't a Confederacy. The United States is still united, and suddenly he's living he can never go back to his own time, and he's sort of stranded in there. And the story itself has been done 1,000 times over since then, but it's one of the first like times someone ever did it. So in that case, it's definitely worth a check out. But it's stories like that were heavily influenced by science fiction tropes like time travel and parallel universes. And that's kind of why, though, I also like Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, because he tried to get away from that kind of stuff. There are some moments in that where it gets a little surreal, and parallel universes obviously are a part of it, but it's mostly the changes themselves are not supernatural. And around that time, you started seeing more and more alternate histories drop the supernatural aspect. They're still out there, but more stories just involve different decisions, different outcomes to events, and they became less science fiction-y and more historical fiction, because that's all they were. They were just people doing about their lives, but in a setting similar and yet vastly different from our own.
Yeah, so I have a couple of, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I had so the one time travel thing I wanted to get before we drift too far away from World War II was this Saturday Morning Breakfast serial comic that I think is the best story ever. And I don't know why someone hasn't made this into a film. And so basically what it is that like 100 years from now, we invent time travel. Mm-hmm. And ever since then, the first thing we've had to do is go back and kill Hitler. But then the first person you got sent back got killed by Hitler. And what's been happening is that like over the next 1,000 years, people keep trying to go back and kill Hitler and fail. Can Hitler throughout his life, because like I guess it's like a predestination type thing. Like you can't kill Hitler, but you can try. And so Hitler over this period deals with people like time travelers just coming back over and over again. Eventually he becomes this like super awesome ninja who's just like amazing at killing time travelers. And then sometime like 1,000 years in the future, some time traveling army comes back to destroy the Earth, and they're like, who can we turn to reliably kill all of these time travelers? And it's like, so they like go to Hitler and ask him if he'll come to save the future. And it's just like, what is this whole story? But
that is insane. It reminds me of this like story. It was a comic book. It was a post-apocalyptic sort of world where vampires were around, and they cloned Jesus to be a vampire killer. And I can't remember what it was called, but it was just insane. Just watching Jesus kill these vampires and everything like that. And at one point, the church makes an army of Jesus clones to kill vampires.
There's like a Mad TV sketch that was like that, where they sent the Terminator back to save Jesus from getting crucified. And he kills Judas, and then he has to bring him back to life. Yeah.
And he kills him again. Oh, what if like the reason Hitler is who he was because he was just this normal guy, like a normal young guy, like very optimistic and just like, I'm gonna do such great things. And then he's like almost killed by a time traveler, and he keeps getting like run-ins with people trying to kill him to the point where he becomes so disillusioned with life that it turns him down the path that makes him Hitler in the first place.
Well, you can say the other way, like he becomes motivated. Like he's like, if time travelers keep coming back to kill me, maybe like I'm supposed to do something really important. And that's like what drives him to like think about the world and like develop his whole philosophy and like his conspiracy theories. And it's like a whole thing like that. Oh man, that's good. But I guess this is Civil War stuff. There's another alternate history story I want to see written, and that is the South winning the Civil War alternate history scenario, where by like 1920, the South is like this extremely economically depressed, like backwater disaster. And like people are talking about reunification, but the United States is just like, we do not want to try to integrate this like complete disaster of a country into our states. And it's just like,
it's completely possible. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this southeastern United States is one of the more economically poorer parts of the United States. And if you see a South that doesn't have access to federal funding from the other states, that is generated from the other states, you might see them be extremely poor, especially around the 1880s, where you started to see cotton prices fall because there were now, more, cotton growing in places like Egypt, India. I think Australia too had some cotton as well. And that's caused cotton prices to drop significantly. If you have a South that's independent and still dependent on cotton, that's going to destroy their economy when they're no longer the single source of cotton for the world.
Yeah.
And so if they can't deal with that situation,
and their decentralized nature, their resistance to industrialization, And
resistance to just cooperating in general. One thing I always thought was just like mind-boggling was like everyone always says like, oh, the South, they didn't have as much many train tracks as railroads, train tracks, whatever, as the North. But something people always leave out about that is that not only didn't they have as many railroads as the North, what railroads they did rarely, if ever, crossed state lines. And when they did, one state might have a wider track than another. So if they were transporting troops, they would have to get off, walk across the state line, and then get on, because there was no way to get one train over to the other one. And it's just like, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
What were you thinking? Why would you think that would be a good idea if you're going to build a freaking railroad?
Yeah, and I imagine that slavery would not really survive all that much longer due to the kind of changes of industrialization and everything. And so by the 1920s, you'd have a South that, well, like, you know how the South can be. They'll be super or Americans in general, they'll be stuck in their ways. Like, they will refuse to reintegrate. They'll refuse, and they'll have their whole heritage and everything, but they'll have no economy, no industry, nothing going for them. And yet they would just pressure on, and it would just be I don't know. I just see like this Confederacy, like this 1919 situation of like the Confederacy begging to get reincorporated into the United States. The United States just being like, yeah, no thanks.
I mean, it might be like some version of South Africa before apartheid ended, except the ratio between whites and blacks wouldn't be. Can you see my hands? Wouldn't be as great, which would, I think, give less reasons internally, at least, to reform. But at the same time, you would still have that outside pressure barreling down, which means that they would be a kind of a pariah state in that sense.
You could have the United States. The United States would also do probably what we did to fuck with the United States for a long time, which was that when the U.S. practiced slavery, we just had carte blanche acceptance of any slaves that could escape into Canada. So if the United States was just like, yeah, we'll just accept any former slave that crosses the border as a refugee, and then all of a sudden that would just be the death.
Well, yeah, and that kind of happened in American history for a while. The South tried to force the fugitive slave laws to apply to every state. And a lot of northern states were kind of against that. It's like, don't tell us what to do. Don't say you have states' rights and then tell us we don't have the right to declare who has the right to be free in our own state. It's that level kind of a hypocrisy.
Yeah, the Bostonians actually stormed the jailhouse and freed a fugitive slave and put him on a boat and sent him to Canada.
Yeah, Canada was pretty much the final location along many lines of the Underground Railroad. And that goes all the way back. That sort of tradition of free slaves fleeing to Canada goes all the way back to the American Revolutionary War, where a lot of black slave crossed British lines and then ended up in Canada. Although many, to be fair, in America's defense, many of them left Canada as well because there was still racism back in the day as well, and so a lot of them went to Sierra Leone and Africa and other places as well, like the Bahamas. I think was also the site, some as well. But it's a sad history in many ways when you really read about it. But yeah, one way of looking at it too is what people talk about Korea ever unifying, and they're saying that why would South Korea want that? You have this really backwards country with a failing infrastructure that would cost billions, if not trillions of dollars to modernize. Why would they ever want to reunify with North Korea? Which is a fascinating way of looking at that conflict. All these people thinking one day they'll be together again, and I would think if I was a South Korean official, I'd be looking at that and be like, don't tell us what to do. We don't want to have that problem in our future. It'll destroy our economy.
I mean, I still think that it would happen because the same problem came up in 1991. And they decided that putting the country back together was a bigger ideal than the economy. And Germany ended up all the better for it anyway. So.
Yeah, I would probably argue though maybe that East Germany wasn't as bad as North Korea is today, but
True.
I don't know that much about East German history, but I gotta believe that knowing what I do versus knowing what I know, or at least what I think I know about North Korea, it's apples and oranges kind of looking at the kind of ways. But I don't know. Anyone in the comments, please feel free to disagree with me.
Yeah, I'm watching the chat, so if anybody has any questions for us, we are free to answer them. That's part of what this is. This is Subscriber Appreciation Day, so we're here for you.
Yeah. If you want us to talk about movies we thought were going to be really stupid, we can do that as well.
Oh yeah, we can talk about anything. We could talk about I don't know. Now I'm trying to think about movies that are stupid. I'm like such an optimist about movies, and it hurts me so much because so often there are movies that I'm like, I really want this to be good, and then I know it's going to be bad, but I have to see it anyway, and then it's like, oh yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
That happened to me sometime with a large Warner Brothers film that came out last spring about a Batman and a Superman who don't like each other.
The DC movies.
I think Jesse Eisenberg. I think he could do it. I think he could pull it off. Nope.
He tried too hard to be the Joker. Like that was Lex Luthor mocking the Joker. That was that performance. It was just like I've always liked the animated series where Lex Luthor is just this really like cool-headed, suave businessman. I always really liked that. I would have loved to see someone do that. Someone a little older than Jesse Eisenberg. Don't get me wrong, Jesse Eisenberg is a fine actor, but I would have loved to have seen somebody with a little more gravitas try the role.
Although I did like the idea of what I thought about Jesse Eisenberg and what I thought would be really good if they did for Lex Luthor in that movie was I would have loved, like, as an update, to have Lex Luthor, it would make sense to me to him be like an evil Silicon Valley type thing, like basically
I was going to say that.
Evil Mark Zuckerberg. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted out of this guy.
Oh, that would have been awesome because then he could have all the access to all this information, and he could maybe like use it to like change public opinion about Superman and stuff like that.
And like really what's cool. It called? And Mark Zuckerberg's even apparently not so subtly running for president in 2020.
Yeah,
and
everyone's running for president. The Rock just announced he was running for president.
But Mark Zuckerberg's actually got like an exploratory committee and stuff, like getting ready to go. But like Lex Luthor does become president in the comics, and so that would have been a great plot line to go down if you just turned. Jesse Eisenberg was literally Mark Zuckerberg in the Social Network, like so it would have been so good.
Oh man. Yeah, that would have been awesome. But yeah, the DC cinematic universes has been kind of disappointing, all things considered. I mean,
kinda.
I know people like it. People do like it, so I'm not trying to step on too many toes. There's some good parts of it. They have. I mean, a lot of people gave Zack Snyder crap for showing Superman kill people, but he did kill people in the comics, so it's not that ridiculous of an idea to see that sort of story be brought on the screen. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't particularly like what they've done with it, but I could see why other people might enjoy it. So I just know that people do like it, so I'm not trying to step on too many toes. All things, and I'm a DC fan. I'm a DC Comics fan. The comics I've read have all been DC, but which is weird because I've read nothing but DC Comics, and the few times I've tried to get into Marvel, I just been But when it comes to the movies, I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'll go see them every time they come out. But the DC Universe, I'm like, do I really need to watch this? It's very weird what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that like they had a golden opportunity because I also am a big fan of the DC stories, and I think that if you were to go by what I know about the two big franchises of comics, and that is that DC always has the best writers and Marvel always has the best artists.
And yeah, that's been traditionally how they've done things, because that used to be the Marvel method. The art comes first, then you fill in the dialogue. Well, DC has always been story driven more than art driven.
Yeah, and I thought that like, DC is coming into it late in the game, so like we obviously needed some time for us to just be like, oh, comic book movies can be can exist. They can just be more than what like is average going on. So I was like, all right, let's do this. And then I thought that they would come out with like, the good stories. And I thought like, well, their first one's going to be literally like an adaptation of the Frank Miller Batman, like Dark Knight Returns thing. And they didn't do it. And I was like, man, like that's the kind of stuff that would have been good. But
Maybe. I mean, I like The Dark Knight Returns, but Dark Knight Returns was essentially an Elseworlds book. It was kind of set in sort of an alternate timeline. I never thought it really should be canon.
Yeah, but you can
And
tweak it. You can tweak the story so that it would fit in a DC cinematic universe,
well,
and it
that's
would be interesting, and it would tell most of the story. Yeah, you can't have old one-armed Green Lantern shooting a kryptonite arrow to give robot Batman the advantage when he's plugged himself into the very lamppost that his parents died under so that he could fight Superman, who just finished destroying a country for Ronald Reagan. Like, it was a whole thing.
Yeah, it was pretty insane. But you're kind of right. A direct adaptation probably wouldn't work, but they already kind of did sort of an inspiration from another Frank Miller work, which is Batman Begins. You could see a lot of inspiration from Batman Year One, which is another Frank Miller book, in that movie universe as well. I still think Frank Miller is kind of crazy, especially if you read some of his other stuff, like The Dark Knight Strikes Back, or
there's like
Terror.
super racist comics. Yeah, he's obviously an asshole. But like, there's a lot of good stories. Like, we're in the point where, like, now that they're like, Marvel's like totally embraced all of like the Jeff Johns weirdness, that like, I think that like there could be a good Swamp Thing movie.
Yeah,
why not? like the thing about DC that they have to deal with is that their stuff is inherently sillier than the Marvel stuff, because their stuff was made mostly in like the 1930s, and they don't really care as much about scientific plausibility over at DC. But like, they typically have the best stories, and like, why didn't they just like do something cool with it instead of just like kind of try to copy the formula without the key part, which is that Marvel's whole formula is that they have this genre of film that they know is going to make $1 billion no matter what they publish, so that they take the franchise and then and the huge budget and give it to like these directors who have a little bit of success. They have kind of a cult following, but they don't have like, they've never had the full resources of a giant company behind them. And they give them this franchise, and then they do something really cool with it. That's what they did with Joss Whedon. That's what they did with James Gunn, and that's what they're doing with oh crap, he's the New Zealand director who did the wonderful film something like Our Lives in Darkness or something, and he's now doing Thor Ragnarok.
Oh,
What We Do in the Darkness, which is an amazing movie.
That's something you're seeing kind of like a lot of studios do. They're taking these like directors who had some success with a smaller movie and then immediately giving them this tentpole film that's with massive bloated budget. And I think part of the reason, if I can be cynical here for a second, is because they're a lot easier to control than, say, Spielberg or Cameron or someone like that. So they'll go and follow the vision of what they have for what they want to do in the future down the road. I think you saw this with the Fantastic Four movie that came out. You had this guy who did that found footage superhero movie, and then they gave him this giant budget, but then they didn't let him do anything with it. Yeah. They essentially hamstringed him because they wanted him just follow what they wanted to do. And what they want to do was pretty much shit.
Yeah, but Marvel Studios is smarter than that. That's why, like, if you look, like, I think the Guardians of the Galaxy movies had 2 writers on the screenplay, and James Gunn was one of them. So like, they let them own their thing, and you can just see Joss Whedon's fingerprints all over his movies.
For better or worse.
For better or worse. I think mostly for better. I think he did a decent job. The other one is, and yeah, there's a dark side to this as well, because I too have felt the sting of Neil Blomkamp's career, which was he was kind of a fringe director who was given a huge budget, made one good movie, and then they're like, oh, let's give him all the budget, and then he made 3 shit movies after that.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, I keep waiting for Neil Blomkamp to make another District 9, and he just keeps making bad movies.
Yeah. Oh, well, what are you going to do? I love District 9, though. That was a really good movie. I remember seeing it in theaters.
That's in my top 10 most favorite movies.
Really?
Wow. Yeah, it's really good. I wish that Neil Blomkamp would watch that movie again and say, what did I do in this that I didn't do in Elysium or Chappie or what is the other movie he made? Did he make another movie? Is those the two? Did he do another one?
Did he do the A-Team, or is that just? No, I don't remember.
He was getting set up to do an Alien movie, but then I guess Ridley Scott took that away.
Okay. Yeah, and there's another director that's hard to boss around a lot.
Taika Cohen, is that the director we were talking about? Soliloquy just said in the chat, and Soliloquy is from New Zealand, so he might know. But he did this amazing movie, which if you haven't seen it, you should. And it is, I think he's Taika Cohen. It's called What We Do in the Darkness, and it's a mockumentary about life as a vampire in modern day life in like New Zealand, and it's just like it's like a mix. Like imagine if a vampire movie in the style of like The Office. And you get kind of an idea as to like what this is like, and it's amazing. It's so good, especially like when they have like the different generations of vampires living in the house. Like they're all like flatmates, so they're all like roommates, and they have like What We Do in the Shadows is the name, and they have like the main vampire character. He's like 100 years old, so he's still like kind of got this like aristocratic charm, but then he's got like there's like one from like the Middle Ages who he's like more like gruff and hairy, but then like there's like the 4,000-year-old one who's very much like a Nosferatu type character, and he can't speak and he just lives in the basement, and they just like bring him down food every once in a while, and he's just like we're gonna have a meeting in the office, and he's just like like very much Nosferatu, like with the bald cap and the big ears and like the fangs, and he's just like it's. And also they like run into the werewolves, and the werewolves start chirping them. Like they start like calling at each other and making fun of each other. And then it's just, oh God, it's such a good movie.
Tell me they have like a Twilight vampire who's really young and everything like that and tries to do the sex appeal, because that'd be hilarious.
I don't think so, but they do have like one of the characters is made a vampire in the movie. And there's a bit about him, and especially about how he teaches the vampires all about like modern technology and shows them how eBay works and stuff. But then he has a friend who's a human, and they start hanging out with the guy, and like they just all of a sudden have this human friend that they just like, and they're like, man, this guy's great. Like they just become, and like they start ignoring the new vampire, and they start becoming like best friends with just like this dude who's like an IT worker, and it's just like. It's such a good movie, and it's like this like made on like no budget by this director who's only famous in New Zealand, but he's really famous in New Zealand. And Disney decided to say, hey, we're giving you Thor Ragnarok.
To be fair, that trailer was amazing. No, I know
it looks good.
There are plenty of trailers that I've seen and then been disappointed after I watched it. I think Pacific Rim was a good example for me. Amazing trailer, okay movie, but Thor Ragnarok really looks good. That makes me like the Thor films have always been sort of the weakest in the Marvel series, but that one looks amazing. I really can't wait to see it. It really looks like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, with that and Doctor Strange and what's it called, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I'm starting to see like they're just going down the Jeff Johns hole now. Like they're like, we just want to embrace this like trippy craziness for a while, and so they're doing all the wacky space stuff, and I love it.
Well, if they really want to like follow someone who does a lot of trippy craziness, comic book writer, they should definitely do Grant Morrison, because he was one who got me into DC Comics when I read his run on Justice League, and that's still one of my favorite sort of like eras of the Justice League books, because he's so weird, and so much of the story is in the background. So it's like you really have to read it more than once to get the full picture, and he's really strange. He's really out there. He's definitely one of those like just. But he really sort of gets these characters. I feel like even though he only did him as a member of the Justice League, I still feel like out of all the people I've seen write a good Aquaman comic, it's been Grant Morrison, because he really kind of played this guy who's like, he's the leader of the entire ocean, the largest nation in the world. He doesn't have to be faster than a speeding bullet. He's got an army behind him. he's that, his power comes from other directions, and he did it so well.
Yeah.
Like I remember.
You hear this, Warner Brothers? Warner Brothers, you have all of like the best comic book stories, and yet you made Batman versus Superman. Like, get on this. Come on. My favorite my favorite one from him is actually is All-Star Superman. Which is
that was really
amazing. Grant Morrison with All-Star Superman. I won't give too much spoilers for the chat, but that's the story where they Grant Morrison's like, how would we end Superman?
Yeah.
And so basically Superman gets supercharged with sunlight to the point where he's going to die in a few weeks or months or whatever. But in the meantime, his superpowers have just become like 10, 20, 30 fold. Like he's just become ridiculously powerful. And the whole story is about what Superman does in his like last weeks or months.
Yeah.
And it's basically closing all of like the major Superman storylines. It's really good.
Yeah,
it's kind of a homage to the Trials of Hercules and stuff.
Yeah, he's always. Grant Morrison always seems to understand these characters so well. And I remember he even opened up ideas to like comic books I've never even thought of. Like I was listening to him on a podcast, and he was talking about the ending to The Killing Joke, the Alan Moore book, and he was like, I always thought Batman killed the Joker, and I'm like, wait, what? And he explained it with the laughing, and it stopped, and the light turns off. So they made that joke about crossing the light from an insane asylum. I had to grab my copy and look back, and I'm like, oh my God, is that water I'm watching from the rain, or is that blood? Did Batman just kill the Joker off panel? It was just like, I never even thought about that, but it was just like the way he interprets comic books is fascinating as well.
That would be another person that DC could look to for stuff, because some of the most successful comic book movies in the 21st century are based on Alan Moore stories, i.e. Watchmen and V for Vendetta. But yet, I also know that Alan Moore has kind of gone the route of... do you remember that episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns gets Casino and he becomes so paranoid that he like retires to his room and grows a huge beard and has long fingernails and invents a spruce moose? That's basically what happened to Alan Moore since the 80s.
Yeah, Alan Moore is the crazy uncle of the comic book universe in many ways. And the thing is, I feel like they've tried a lot of Alan Moore books because, Watchmen. I liked Watchmen. I liked V for Vendetta, but they also adapted League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was another Alan Moore book, and that was go well. That was so bad. Sean Connery quit acting, so it could be good though. The book itself is actually really cool. It's a kind of mashup of Victorian storytelling, and I know he made other stories later in different eras, and one of them actually had Harry Potter as the Antichrist. And he has written some fascinating stuff, and he has done like regular DC books. In fact, speaking of Jeff Johns, the whole Blackest Night storyline was based off of a throwaway line that Alan Moore wrote about the Blackest Night prophecy, and Jeff Johns took it and ran with it and created, which was, all things considered, not a bad crossover event. Yeah, I like the Blackest Night was great.
That's when, for everybody else out there, Blackest Night is when Green Lantern's ring gets given to Batman, and it's crazy. There's another one that's really good too, and this is DC. You have so many good writers. Why don't you tap? You know who they could give to write a script for a movie based on a DC title, who has written scripts before and is known to be really good and is associated with nothing but success? Neil Gaiman. Gaiman. Make him make a Sandman movie or something.
Yeah, why don't they do a Sandman? No, well, maybe Sandman would work better as a TV show, but I don't know. I feel like everything works better as a TV show these days.
Well, what is Neil Gaiman? Neil Gaiman's worked on what series has he worked on besides Sandman? He's written the occasional thing.
He did Books of Magic. That was really good. I really enjoyed that series.
All right. How about this? You make a Justice League Dark movie, or you make another Constantine movie. Give it to Neil Gaiman, and it will be amazing. Why doesn't DC just do that? That would be so good. Because Neil Gaiman, he's written a few really good episodes of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
He wrote a handful of novels that have been really great. He wrote American Gods, which is just being adapted into a TV show right now. He wrote Coraline, which got turned into a really successful movie.
Awesome. I love that.
He wrote Sandman, which is like one of the most successful like one-off stories of DC, to the point where like they really integrated it all. Trying to think what else. Like Neil Gaiman, like he's done so many cool things. Like I don't understand why this is why DC has so many great. Like this is why DC has all the great writers, because like I'm trying to think of like a great Jack Kirby. Like that's like there's my like list of Marvel good writers.
Yeah, he did a lot of stuff for Marvel. I'm trying to think too of any kind of Marvel writers who really stand for. Again, I wasn't never a Marvel fan, so I don't have the background for it, all things considered. But yeah, Jack Kirby comes to mind. But Jack Kirby did DC stuff as well. Like Jack Kirby created the whole New Gods and everything like that. And I think that seems to be what the end point for the DC cinematic universe is currently.
I'm hoping that Gal Gadot like brings it back from the dead in a few weeks.
I've heard people say good things about the Wonder Woman movie, so it might work. I have no idea. I might actually be interested in seeing that in the theaters day of. Well, not the day of, weekend of, let's say that. But you
have Ezra, what's his face, who played psychopathic serial killer, and We Need to Talk About Kevin, and now he's going to be the Flash, which is interesting choice, especially because they had Grant Gustin. Like, why didn't you just sweep him up? He would have done it.
Did you get the feeling watching the trailer for Justice League where you saw Bruce Wayne recruiting the Flash? Did you get the feeling that, oh wait, isn't this the scene from Civil War where Tony Stark is recruiting Spider-Man?
Yeah,
they have the same kind of vibe. And I'm like, isn't Barry Allen supposed to be a cop? Isn't he like essentially works, in forensics?
It looks like they're making him like a nerdy teenager, but yeah, he's supposed to be like he's supposed to be kind of forensics guy.
Yeah, but it's like, if you're going to make him a nerdy teenager, why not make him Wally West?
Yeah,
like the guy was already young. It's like, why name him Barry Allen? And I don't know.
Just like with Marvel, how many Peter Parkers do we need? We have why don't we get Miles Morales, especially because everyone's giving everyone shit for not enough representation of these things. Like Miles Morales, he's a popular Spider-Man. He's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm a little biased because I came into DC when Barry Allen was still dead, when Hal Jordan was still dead, where a lot of the like Silver Age kind of guys were not playing, and you had Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern, and I loved him as Green Lantern, and I thought he was one of my favorite characters. And then they brought Hal Jordan back, and suddenly he was pushed to the side, and it's because a lot of old comic book readers loved Hal Jordan. I just never understood it because I didn't read those comic books. I read what was currently going on, and I thought Kyle was a really good job. And again, I thought Grant Morrison did a really good job with him, because there was that throwaway line in his Justice League work where I think. So I can't remember who said it, but they were saying Kyle would be the greatest Green Lantern of all because he understood fear, and Jeff Johns ran with that. And when he brought back Hal Jordan and everything like that, he had Kyle be the responsible, because he wasn't affected by the yellow impurity, and because he understood fear, and the yellow impurity turned out to be a fear monster. And then there was all that craziness with there being other. Yeah,
right,
it got crazy.
I have the greatest thing we can talk about that crosses over our discussion of alternate history and our discussion of comic books, and that is we can talk about Red Son.
Oh, I love Red Son.
Which is that is like, I think actually that might have been the first trade paperback I ever bought.
Really?
That's the first. I was like a teenager when I think they ran Superman Red Son. So for you guys out there, it's an alternate history for DC in which basically Krypton blows up about 12 hours later than it did in the regular story, which means that the rocket ship that sends, Kal-El, whatever, leaves 12 hours later, and it lands on Earth 12 hours later, and because rotation lands in the Ukraine instead of the United States. And basically Superman grows up in like the Soviet Union, and he becomes a Soviet superhero.
Yeah, and there's Stalin becomes like a father figure to him, and Lex Luthor is still around, and he's still a rival to Superman, except Lex Luthor still is in the United States and representing, the capitalist West, while Superman becomes like the defector of not the American way, but the communist way. And, he eventually, because of that, Superman, when Stalin dies, Superman becomes the next general secretary of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And there's this resistance that grows up around him by this Russian guy who's actually like Batman. Becomes this Russian resistance guy. And Wonder Woman's there too, except she doesn't go to the United States. She goes to the Soviet Union. And
well, like her little Amazon island becomes like a proxy type thing, like where the Soviets and the Americans are kind of like fighting for influence in the Cold War, and then they go with the Soviets, and then Wonder Woman becomes like this close ally.
And I think it was Mark Millar who wrote it, and he does a lot of fun stuff with it. Like, I think Kennedy survives assassination, but ends up getting divorced and marrying Marilyn Monroe, who ended up sleeping with a Soviet spy. And they're losing too. The Americans are losing to a point where, at one point in the story, only the United States and Chile are capitalist. Everyone else has become under this sort of communist government led by Superman, who essentially just controls everything to the point that he'll lobotomize anyone who disagrees with him and turn them into like these like organic robots. And he's using Brainiac too as a servant and things like that. And it's all, and the book ends with them. And I'm trying not to spoil everything because I've already spoiled a couple stories, so I won't spoil this. But it does end with a final confrontation between communist Superman and capitalist Lex Luthor in a one final battle for the fate of the entire world. And it's a really fun book. It's a really cool book. It's definitely one of the better alternate histories out there. But DC, it's one of the whole DC Elseworlds, and there's been a lot of Elseworlds books, which are all about, like, you know, the alternate history for mostly the characters, for the DC characters, and some of them are set in the future. Like one that's really good was Kingdom Come. That was a really good one, especially with that awesome Alex Ross artwork. I'm trying to think of another good example. JLA The Nail, where because the Kents get a flat tire, they're not on the road to catch Superman's spaceship. So the DC universe sort of evolves without Superman acting as a representative, and that had some interesting ideas there as well. There was a Batman one where he's in a world where Puritan New England is still existing and everything like that. And there's even one that's really difficult to find. I have no idea, despite how popular Lovecraft is, why DC never sort of like never tries to reprint it. But there's one where Batman is fighting against Lovecraftian monsters and all his villains.
Gotham by Gaslight?
No, it's something completely different. But yeah, Gotham by Gaslight's another good one where there's it's like a steampunk Batman. There's even one where he's a secret agent, where Bruce Wayne's a secret agent in an agency run by Theodore Roosevelt. And there's a lot of imaginative ideas there. And that's comics, you know, I've always dealt with alternate history, but occasionally they've had these imprints. Like Marvel's has been What If. And I actually reviewed a What If comic book in connection with Guardians of the Galaxy coming up. Sadly, that one I discovered didn't have much alternate history in it, all things considered. And yeah, a lot of them do just impact the canon themselves, but occasionally they do put their characters in different settings. Another famous one is Batman becomes a vampire, and to fight another vampire, but then eventually he still continues to fight crime as a vampire. He's like drinking the blood of criminals and stuff like that.
Gosh.
Yeah, they go some crazy stuff.
And even I think the best alternate history thing that we can talk about also to like tap into topping these two topics at the same time is Watchmen, where the entire story of Watchmen is basically Alan Moore speculating what would actually happen to the world if superheroes started showing up. And there's like this whole, I think it was like Alan Moore, while he started going a little, he started losing his faith in what he was doing, because he basically, the thesis of Watchmen is that superheroes inevitably lead to like fascism, and like basically the United States becomes this like pseudo-fascist society because they just have superheroes to deal with any geopolitical issues that they have. So like they really easily win World War II, they really easily win Vietnam.
Right.
And in the meantime, because like they're doing so well and they have all this confidence, they can just like violently put down the hippie movement, and there's just no resistance. And like Richard Nixon, the kind of embodiment of this kind of Americanism, ends up being president for 3 terms, and like it's a whole thing.
Yeah, he essentially becomes a dictator, an old but name. And no, Watchmen is one of those stories where it's not just one of the best alternate histories out there. It's one of the best stories out there. You see that. I'll see Watchmen on like people's list of top 100 novels of all time. It's to sum it up, it's sort of just a realistic take on superheroes, without all of the comic book sort of like this is for kids kind of thing. It kind of talks about like the motivations. Why would someone dress up in skin tight suits and go out and fight crime in the middle of the night? Why would they risk their lives? And what is wrong with these people in many ways? What are some of the psychological issues they're going to have to deal with? And what happens when you have some, and I like how he also sort of like, not, I don't want to say mock, but sort of like parodies the different sort of comic book eras. Like you have the Golden Age heroes who, like the comedian when he first showed up, or the original Silk Spectre, and the first Night Owl, and other ones out there too, who are just sort of costume people who don't have any superpowers, but they have sort of gimmicks that can fight crime. But then you have the more like Silver Age heroes, like Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach and the second Night Owl. And they become not only, Dr. Manhattan is essentially a Superman stand-in. And he really, Alma really looks at like, what happens if you have this person who's so powerful? Why would he be human? How could he even connect with humanity at a time? And then you have Rorschach, who's definitely kind of like, I think Night Owl too, but Rorschach's kind of like a Batman, like someone who's very violent and who's, means justified.
Batman's kind of somewhere between Rorschach and Night Owl the second.
That's what I was saying, because Night Owl has all that technology, but...
Well, do you know the story about all these characters, like where they came from?
Oh, yeah, because they were all based on, I can't remember, the Charlton kind of comic heroes. Like Night Owl's supposed to be Blue Beetle, Rorschach is supposed to be...
The question mark or something like that?
The question. Yeah, Dr. Manhattan is Captain Atom. It was a famous DC hero, actually.
Isn't Captain Atom or... All right, is there a difference between him and like the guy that Superman is playing on TV now? Like the guy who can shrink himself? No,
that's the Atom, not Captain Atom.
Okay.
There's the Atom who can shrink himself, and there's Captain Atom who's a nuclear powered superhero. And he can shoot out energy and do things like that. He was of the Charlton era, the Charleston, I want to say. He was their Superman essentially, and he has kind of similar powers. And he's also can be very dangerous because he's kind of like if you break him open, he can have a nuclear meltdown and explode. And so things like that. I think Silk Spectre is there was a character too, and now I'm blanking on it.
She always reminds me so much of the Black Canary. So
yeah, but
that's probably just in costume.
Yeah. The comedian was Peacemaker, but the comedian, because that's the thing about Watchmen, that he also kind of like doesn't just do DC, he also does a lot of Marvel too. I think the comedian is also supposed to be Captain America. And
yeah, like Captain America as he should have been. Also, Captain America has kind of hopped the aisle once, didn't he?
Well, wait, what?
I thought like Captain America as like he was something that was closer to a DC comic hero, and then Marvel kind of scooped him up at some point. Because he's older than Marvel.
It's possible. I don't know the history about Captain America all that much, but it's really possible. I mean, he definitely was a character who was made as just pure propaganda. It's like, yeah, Captain America, World War II is going on. So you wanted someone you can look at and just sort of idolize. But over years, they sort of expanded the character and made him give him a little bit more depth instead of just being for propaganda purposes completely. But getting back to like Watchmen, the comedian was supposed to reflect America not as it wants to be, which Captain America is, the idealized version of America. The comedian affects America what it is, and that's the joke essentially. Yeah. Watchmen, the one that implied joke that is going throughout the whole story. It's a dark book. It can be just incredibly sad at times, but it's still really good. And yeah, definitely check it out. Everyone should read it, whether you like alternate history or not. Read it.
It's in my top 10, or at least at the top. It might be even number one for great novels that you can read in like 2 or 3 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty easy to read, and it's not always comics. They take moments to just kind of have a regular story. A traditional
Yeah,
story.
I
It's
love
not
actually. That's what I love is like the little thing about like the little details because it is a work of alternate history, but it's got like one detail is that because superheroes are real, the escapist comic book fantasy moves towards kind of the things that were going on in comics before superheroes, which were
right,
things like Tarzan and specifically for this like pirate comics. And
right.
so by the 1980s, comic books aren't about superheroes; they're about pirates. And interspersed with it is like an entire comic of this like really dark kind of comic about pirates, and I know it's probably has some like deeper symbolism that I don't understand, but it's always been there and I've always thought about it. But
Yeah, and other two, he also plays with the trope how like in comic books you have these characters who can create these like amazing technological leaps, and then they do nothing with them other than fight crime. They don't try to patent it and sell it and make a ton of money. Watchmen does that. Like when Dr. Manhattan shows up, by studying Dr. Manhattan, they start to be able to change technology. That's why you see people
like free
like
energy.
free energy, right? And even the fact that Dr. Manhattan could produce like almost unlimited amount of helium. So you start seeing more blimps in the sky because fears of hydrogen no longer exist.
Yeah.
No Hindenburg because you have these helium airships, and it's just it's a really great deconstruction of comic books. So if you're a comic book fan or if you're just a fan of good stories in general, definitely check out Watchmen. I should mention a few good alternate histories.
Yeah,
Because I know
we're kind of coming near like the end of the time that I thought we would do this, so probably got about 10 minutes left, and I would like to circle back to the genre as a whole. And
Mhm.
so I'd like to kind of maybe let's start with getting a little bit of cutting to the core. Why do you love it so much? Like, what is your main thing you get out of this genre?
I love history. I've always have loved history ever since I watched my grandpa's collection of Victory at Sea documentary tapes. It's just been this subject that's always fascinated me. It's something I've always loved. I'm the type of person who will go to some place with deep historical significance, and I'll probably get incredibly emotional just because it's like I can just really imagine what it was like there, and I love thinking about how important these events are. I feel like a way to really imagine how important these events are is to imagine what would the world be like if they're not there. And that really can tell you the world that we have here is because of all these events that happen. And you really start to imagine what you can lose if you change things. And that's sort of one of the reasons why I think if you had to really sort of go to the deep reason why, like it's just that, it's because it really shows you how important these events are to create the world that we live in today, the world that we exist, the world where our loved ones and friends exist. They're because of these events. And if you can imagine the world without it, it shows you how much important these events really were. And
All right,
that's
and how
why I
about
like them.
excellent? And so, like, what are the top shelf alternate history stories? Like, there's always alternate history stories for people who are like really into it, but like, if you were to start somebody off with like the best stuff, where would you want them to start off?
Well, we talked a few of them already. I would still recommend Man the High Castle, Bring the Jubilee. Watchmen is obviously a good one to go to as well. I would also check out Resurrection Day by Brendan Dubois. Dubois? Let's go with Dubois. It's a timeline where the Cuban Missile Crisis goes hot, and I thought he did a really good job. It's again, it's like a murder mystery in sort of like a post-war America, and it's pretty plausible how he sort of showed it because most people don't realize the missile gap that existed at the time between the Soviet Union and America. So if a war was to start, yeah, the United States would get hurt, but the Soviet Union would probably be wiped off the map. And I thought he did a really good job showing that. Other stories to check. Oh, Fatherland's another good one. The Years of Rice and Salt by Kim Stanley Robinson. And that one, the Black Death is a lot worse. So Europe is pretty much just depopulated, and thus the rest of the world is allowed to develop without European influence. And I've always said that someone wants a perspective of history from a non-Western point of view, definitely check out The Years of Rice and Salt. Really good story. And it also definitely follows this kind of theory that humans don't have that much impact on how history develops. It's a lot of intangible forces, and it's a really good story. Definitely check it out. What other ones?
Oh, what's that one that you did a review of it recently where like like a lot of the fathers of the Soviet Union ended up through different circumstances having immigrated to the United States, and like Stalin starts becoming a political leader in the U.S.
That's Joe Steele by Harry Turtledove. That's another one. Stalin immigrates. Stalin's parents immigrate to America, and he's born here, so he's able to become president of the United States after FDR dies under mysterious circumstances. He's elected, and he slowly turns America into a totalitarian state. And it's actually it's pretty fascinating. There's some he does sort of play around plausibility. I can buy Stalin. I can suspend disbelief enough to believe that Stalin could be born in America and still have the same personality despite having a vastly different young life. But the fact that so many other Soviet leaders could also be born in America and have the same personalities they did in our timeline, it's like, all right, a little too much nature over nurture. But it's still a fascinating look at how someone in the White House could turn the country into a dictatorship.
Man, that'd be a good read in 2017.
It's kind of depressing.
there's a trailer for a movie that I never ended up seeing because it was like an indie film and I could never find it. But this brought back the memory of it, and it was one where basically Trotsky is alive today, but he's like it's like basically a reincarnation of Trotsky.
Okay.
But he's like in his early 20s, and he's like at college in the United States, and it's about him like kind of he basically gets involved in student government and like all this like kind of Trotsky like stuff. I never got to see it though, but they actually had like this 21-year-old actor who had like the glasses and like everything.
Did he have an antagonist with a really bushy mustache? That would have been pretty awesome too.
I would love to see that. I would love to see that movie. But I think that book you were talking about with Stalin Joe Steele sounds really good, because I would love to see this is where alternate history could be really useful, is that you could see that what Stalin did to the Soviet Union didn't have anything to do with the Soviet Union being communist, authoritarian, and kind of showing that like the economic model doesn't matter really, and Stalin could have happened in the United States as well.
It's the whole "it can't happen here" phenomenon, which is a title of a book as well, where it says that you hear about all this crazy stuff happening on the other side of the world and you think it can't happen here, and alternate history shows you sometimes it kind of can. We had the possibility to do just the awful things, and here's how we could if some things were a little bit different. One other book I wanted to mention was The Yiddish Policemen's Union by Michael, how do you say his name? Chaban? I'm sorry I'm saying it wrong. I'm always horrible at pronouncing people's names. But in this one, in our timeline, there was a scheme put forth before Congress about settling Jewish refugees from Europe in the lead up to World War II in Alaska. It actually was shot down by the Alaskan representative at the time. But in this case, it's not, and they actually are settled there, but they're only supposed to be settled there temporarily. And suddenly it's like their lease is ending, and now there's all this concern about what are we going to do with these millions of Jews who are living in Alaska who are about to be illegally living in American territory. And while that's happening, there's a murder mystery going on as well, hence the Yiddish Policemen's Union. And it's and there's a conspiracy. It's an interesting sort of like criticism, especially of certain sects of evangelical Christians who feel like Israel has to exist for the end of days to happen, and that plays along with the story as well. And so it's definitely an interesting book. I definitely recommend checking that out. And he's more of a literary author as well. He's not like more versed in alternate history, so he definitely brings a fresh perspective to it. But if you want people who do write a lot of alternate history, I definitely want to recommend Island in the Sea of Time by S.M. Stirling, where Nantucket is sent back in time to the Bronze Age. And it's just, if you want to see some amazing world building, definitely check out Stirling right there. Also, if you like, another kind of story has a similar kind of concept, but I think it's larger scope, because eventually the author opened it up to other authors, and he built this like I don't know how many stories, dozens of books written by dozens of authors and dozens and even hundreds of short stories. It's 1632 by Eric Flint, where this fictional West Virginia coal mining town is sent back in time to Germany in the 30 Years' War. And it's just them trying to survive and dealing with the fact that they're in the past and there's no way they're going home ever again, and the kind of society they build. And you might want to check out Sterling's work first, because it's only 3 books to the series. While, again, Flint's work eventually evolved into this like epic size multi-volume series that even I have sort of given up just because I'm just overwhelmed by how much there is to read. But it's still, the first book is still really good, and I definitely recommend checking it out.
All right. And how about as like a coda, tell us about what you do, your channel, what the value proposition is, and kind of tell people why they should go and subscribe right now.
Yeah, well, my channel is The Alternate Historian. I try to, at least once a week, put out a video where I talk about alternate history and related topics. It's sort of like helps explain the genre. And also, I also, review works within the genre, or sometimes I just sort of like take what-ifs that are asked sometimes by my Patreons, or just things that I find interesting, and really try to give a sort of analysis about, well, could this actually happen? I also sometimes look at alternate history maps, which is sort of the more artistic side of the genre, where there is a large community of people who actually will create maps, fake maps based on alternate history, where and that's all. And the story itself is in this single frame of artwork. And I often will talk about some of those that have gotten some mainstream appeal, for better or worse. And that's just it. My channel is about talking alternate history. And I have a wide range of ideas, and it kind of, there's no set schedule of what I'm going to really do. I've tried in the past, but it's just like one video a week about alternate history. And that's pretty much, if you like the alternate history or want to learn more, I definitely recommend checking out my channel.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I do want to say to everybody out there, thank you guys so much for supporting Step Back and watching the videos, and I hope to make more. There should be a new video next week, inshallah. And I really want to thank Matt the Dwayne Mitrovich.
Nice. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And I'll see you guys next month. I don't have a guest lined up for it yet, but I'll be doing another one. And it'll also be early because I'm going to be at VidCon in June, so I got to go before then. All right. Take care, everybody.